Ready. So now that you've submitted your GitHub username, remember there could be a lag because depending on when you've done this, for you to actually start on this next round of items for setup. So I just want to say that before we jump in to this particular item. So remember, I'm typically not a late night person. So if you submit your GitHub username, like at 9 o'clock at night, I won't see it until the next day. Okay, so now let's talk about, because for this particular semester we're coming into fall 2022, I'm changing the way I have students set up an environment. And when we say environment, this is really and you'll notice there's two options, which I'm about to go over. And so an environment is what you use to code and how you keep track of that code to share with the class. Okay. So up until this semester, I've made students do a local dev environment. And for the most part, students were able to navigate this, but there has been occasion where this has created stumbling blocks for students. So, what I've done this semester is the beginning of this summer, I have actually done a research about which cloud options for development there are. There has been a little bit of a lag because most people have heard about the cloud. They're using the cloud in some way, either for their photo sharing. I mean, we could go on and on about all the cloud services that are out there. But for coding, for development, has been a little bit of a lag because of what's required. So for me, I decided this semester was a semester I wanted to give this option. And the more I looked at this particular site, because I looked at a handful, the more it made sense. Okay. So I'm just telling you. And I will say this one last thing before I jump in to describe it, is that I would recommend for those that are new to, setting up environments or don't even know what that means, or command line, start with the cloud option. And then if you're somebody who already has maybe taken one of my classes before, you understand how you've done local setups, you can do that as well. I wouldn't recommend doing both yet. And you can definitely ask me why. And maybe as I get into this particular short discussion, it'll help explain it. Okay, so cloud, local or cloud. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually describe the two options fairly briefly. And then what you need to do is, once I've invited you into the GitHub organization, you need to complete this step. And there is a video. I might redo this. I will review it to make sure it's still relevant, which I believe it is. But so let's start with this. Okay. So for your JavaScript development environment, the reason we start with GitHub is that GitHub is a website. It's also a service, right, out on the cloud. And you will, in this case, this is what you're going to do next. You will use public and private repos that you're going to create next. They're basically folders for storing your work. Okay, here's an example of the naming convention. And I do say follow my naming conventions. Okay, so you'll create these. But what happened next for students was they had to set up their local dev environment. And what this meant is, on whatever local machine, and in this case, it could be Windows, it could be Mac, it could be Linux. I've had a few students definitely use Linux for my class. And you could have used a Chromebook with some stipulations. You had to have a particular Chromebook, you had to have a particular processor. So it was definitely more things you had to do. So as an example, you had to install Git. Now Git and GitHub. So Git is actually the software that you install locally that keeps track of all the coding changes. And VS Code is the editor. In this case, if you were doing your own local development environment and you wanted to use something else, that's fine. I don't care, frankly, as long as you know that I will use VS Code and it's what I can support students best on. So anyway, we're going through the local environment. And then what you would do, again, prior to this semester, if this was your option, you would clone, which basically says these repos that you're creating, these folders up on GitHub, you actually clone. You could think of it as a copy, but it's actually not a direct copy because they're still linked. Okay. And again, so at this point, you have these repos locally now on your system. And what you would do is you'd code locally, track the changes using Git, and push code to GitHub with Git commands. Now, this is what you're going to learn in the next series. Okay. So in this case, what happened was once you had the assignment due, then you would push that code to GitHub. Okay. Because this GitHub is where everything, and this is my next point, work completed in this class is submitted with GitHub URLs. Okay. So you're coding locally, right? You're pushing that, you're tracking it, pushing that code here. So you only have to clone once, but you push each time you do that. So this works fine. Most students were able to navigate this process in the week 0 that you are in right now. But I've decided, as I've said, now I'm going to actually use a service, a website called gitpod.io. What's cool is, it's a development environment for the web, for the cloud. And so instead of cloning, you'll basically create a workspace that takes these repos, again, your two here, and it creates this space out on the cloud, a workspace for you to work in. So it's basically the same idea of a local, except instead of cloning, you're just creating the workspace. All right. And then you code in the workspace, you track changes just like you would here, and you push to GitHub. And again, you use this process to submit your work. Now, this is why I'm trying to say I would, for at least for the next couple of weeks, for those of you that feel like you have experience, right? It's fine to set up your local. I wouldn't do both because it gets a little confusing. Because if you're coding and if you understand it and there is definitely a way to do it, you just have to do an additional step, which is called syncing, to where if you have changes here, you have to push it to GitHub, and then here you have to pull those changes in. Again, I wouldn't at this point, especially in the first couple weeks. But here's the thing: come talk to me. I love talking about this stuff. Okay. So hopefully now that you understand, and as I said before, which option should you choose really depends on you. What kind of system are you running? Because here's the other thing about having the cloud is that you are definitely dependent on your cloud reliability, meaning your internet reliability, right? So, and you can again, it doesn't really matter so much as long as you have a good supported browser like a Chrome, which I recommend, Firefox, maybe even Brave would work out here. But I just want you to know going in that you get to choose. I'm giving you my recommendation on which one to select, but select one and do the next step. Now, no matter which option you select, everyone is doing this step the same way. Okay, so this is now your next step. You're going to create these two repos that I was talking about out here on GitHub. And then after now this particular one, there's nothing you have to do for this particular item. But let me just scroll back now, because now that I've recorded this first one, what I'm going to do is create the next series showing you how to use the Git pod. And by the time you've gotten here, these will be done. But these are actually from last semester that I did last semester. So those are already done. So now my job is to do this. But let me just be clear. Your job is actually now, once you've been invited to the GitHub organization for this course, is to create these repos that I've mentioned. Hope this helps you out. I'll talk to you soon.